You get one cop throwing his badge down because he doesn't think you're being tough enough on the Ramseys, and you have another detective throwing his badge down because he thinks you're too tough. There were a couple of very difficult customers to deal with who made decisions early about who done it. And because they were inexperienced, neither one of them ever having worked a homicide case, and because they were in charge, basically, it was a rough period of time. When we got to around April, and this case was stalled, the decision was made, we need to interview these people. No evidence in this case was given to the Ramseys. It was not the product of a joint decision between Kobe, Commander Eller, and my people.
So, kind of finishing off our analysis on JonBenet Ramsey, how the investigation got derailed, and Why It Still Matters by Alan Prendergast, November 30th, 2024, originally published in 2014, walking through the early hours of December 26th of 1996, about JonBenet missing and sort of the immediate aftermath of that. Yesterday, I kind of dug into how the Ramseys quickly shifted from being mourning parents to tightly managed media figures. I unpacked the rift with Fleet and Priscilla White, and how they initially supported the Ramseys, but grew uneasy once lawyers, PR firms, and investigators took over. And then Fleet kind of really begged John to talk about or talk to the police, telling him that those next 24 hours would define the rest of his life. And John agreed. But as you know, he disappeared behind his lawyers. He actually agreed twice. He said, I'll do it to Fleet. And then he went on CNN later on that day and said he'd do it again. And he didn't do it. We also talked about Patsy pushing JonBenet into pageantry despite ongoing issues like bedwetting and some of her illnesses. And then Priscilla gave Patsy a book, I think, Surviving Ophelia, out of concern, but Patsy seemed a little bit more focused on performance than JonBenet's well-being. And so I made the point that if Patsy could cover up those small things, then it's not really that far-fetched to think that she might be able to cover up something bigger too. That's kind of the methodology that you're going to use moving forward. Then came the CNN interview. John claimed that Fleet actually suggested it. He said it was Fleet's idea to actually go on television and do the interview, but that doesn't really make sense. And so the interview was already lined up, from probably what we can tell is already lined up, and Patsy was being styled for TV, not really police interview. She had on her diamond ring. She was, boom, flashing it, and and then she had her mink coat, and she was ready to go. And then Priscilla had to come by and say, hold on, this is not what you want to do. So friends were being sidelined. Ramseys were planning to leave Boulder altogether from the jump before they even left Colorado to go to the funeral. The article talks about the fact that they were already lining up, leaving Colorado to go to Atlanta, which puts the phone call on December 26th in perspective. When John called his pilot, they were already ready to go. And then I kind of closed by questioning how Access Graphics, once worth $1 billion in sales, dropped to $200 million in value within a year. Something about the fire sale price just doesn't seem right. And so finally talked about the idea of handwriting changes, media strategy, and how the legal team aggressively shaped the narrative from day one. And so it wasn't just about grief. It was made about control. And that's what the case sort of really thrived off of in that perspective. Before I get started on sort of the rest of this, I want to say thank you to 3 special people who were able to support the channel and give super thanks. I'm always grateful when you guys sort of donate and give super thanks. We have Eva West, who was generous and gave $24.99. I appreciate this immensely. We have Trace the Ace. You already know Trace. You already know Eve. I think Luis is um, new, but we certainly welcome Louise to the family. Thank you so much, Louise, for the $2. Really appreciate it. Thank you for supporting, and thank you to everyone who gave a like or a thumbs up to these gifts. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So, kind of looking at a few things here, and the first thing that I want to start off with is D.A. Hunter. And so, to kind of start off here, uh, talking about D.A. Hunter is that what he did in the wake of the grand jury, after the grand jury sort of um, ended their proceedings, what Alex Hunter did not mention, and what would not be made public for another 14 years, was that the foreman of the grand jury had signed the true bill seeking the indictment of John and Patsy Ramsey on 2 felony counts each. The statute of limitations for any possible prosecution of those charges expired after Hunter's announcement. And he has 3 months, but I think according to Colorado statute, if they updated it, it's actually 3 years. And essentially, what it's saying is that they had uh, Alex Hunter had 3 years to file. But what happened was Alex Hunter left almost immediately after he got after this Ramsey case, after the grand jury. He left almost immediately. He didn't want to re-up, and he just kind of dumped it into the hands of Mary Lacey, and that was that. Left it to her to deal with, and then go from there. And so, while Allen is saying that the charges expired 3 months after, um, I think it's actually 3 years, because I was checking on that, and maybe they've updated the law since then, but it's actually 3 years from what I saw recently. I think as of 2023, it was 3 years. So basically, saying that if you're going to indict someone, you have to file that indictment with the court within 3 years. You have 3 years, and so basically, that's essentially saying that you have 3 years. I hope it wasn't 3 months, but you had 3 years. What were you in 99? Probably 2000 or 102. You had 3 years to kind of, you know, go back and say, okay, so what do we have? Where do we want to move forward, knowing what we know in terms of the grand jury? You have that. There's much more, and kind of the deep dive that we're doing now, especially revealing some things about statements that were being said. This lets you know just how disconnected from the case DA Hunter actually was, because some of these things being said warrant a follow-up. They're incredibly alarming for a DA to just look past and act like nothing was presented, or act like nothing presented was usable in making a case against child neglect, is essentially what they were trying to do. They were trying to make the case for child neglect. And DA Hunter was saying, oh, well, we don't have anything. You don't have anything? You couldn't find anything for child neglect specifically for 3 years? Are you kidding me? I mean, you could start with the medical records. You could start with that and then trace from there. At least some sort of small, I don't know if there's a misdemeanor for it, but maybe some sort of misdemeanor. And I'm not advocating that you just, just come up with some useless bullcrap charge, just to be charging somebody with something just because you're upset. I don't advocate for that. I don't want to do that. But I'm just saying that in 3 years, you could have come up with something, but this is the problem. So if it's in my notes, I don't want to repeat it, so I'll just read my notes. D.A. Hunter did not bring charges, and he knew the charges for indictment had a statute of limitations, meaning if you want to prosecute the Ramseys on something, especially this, uh, it can't, or yeah, well, if this means that if you want to prosecute the Ramseys on something, then it can't be this um, any longer, because I guess that's to say those charges are expired. Um, and I'll kind of talk about that more. Uh, John and Patsy are well aware of this fact, and probably sure they are. Had Morgan informed and probably informed them that or Patrick Burke and Armstead informed Patsy, and then obviously HMF informed John that for these specific things you can't be charged with anymore because the statute of limitations is up for these, and so you can't bring these charges on them anymore. And so I would suspect that if Patsy and John are well aware of this, in some respects, it might embolden them to say certain things. They might be able to just go out and just say whatever um, that they want in some cases, but in some points that they can't for certain reasons. An interesting point, which I've lightly looked at, is the time period in which John and Patsy actually demanded DNA testing, not just in the context of duty, like, hey, we need, we're going to give you our hair and blood samples because you're asking us for it. But at what point in time did they actually start demanding that something with the DNA be done? When was that? Is my question, because they mentioned being aware that their DNA didn't match in 1997, at the beginning of 1997. But my question is, especially in the interviews, the 97 interviews and the 1998 interviews, I went back and I tried to look to kind of see where were they demanding, hey, you have the DNA, we know that you have the DNA, and we know that the DNA doesn't point to us, and you guys need to look more at the DNA to find this person. And so, as they said they knew the truth of the DNA in January of 1997, yet their 1997 interviews do not reflect them demanding more focus on the DNA. Nor in later interviews that I can tell that I saw, I was searching for it, did they demand the use of the DNA or more focus on the DNA. And so I wonder if the DNA became a focal talking point later as opposed to earlier stages. Even though John Ramsey supposedly offered to pay for testing, it didn't seem to happen until um, this whole grand jury thing passed or was well passed. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like John started demanding for DNA testing, is kind of what's interesting to me. And so I kind of think of it as like a difference in difference, in that if you were well aware that you were in the clear prior to, because in 1997 you kind of don't want to rock the boat, you know, but once you get cleared of this charge, which is probably the only charge that you can be hit with, and 3 years after, you know, 3 years after the charges expire, you don't say anything until, you start kind of lightly, you know, bouncing in and saying, well, maybe we can start looking at the DNA. Who's not making a big enough deal? The BPD, they're not making a big enough deal of the DNA. We need to go look at that. I don't find that it was that kind of demand was present from either John or Patsy. And it's going to be present from John more so, because John honestly is really spearheading staying on top of the case more than Patsy. Patsy was just a tag along from what I can tell. Patsy wasn't spearheading anything. In terms of talking about people who may have done this or looking at other suspects, that was going to be John. Patsy heard stuff from John It's like she took a back seat on her daughter's murder and just let John run it. Well, John said that and it makes sense because John had been doing that all of her life, all of her adult life. He's been leading her into what the right thing to do was. Like we said before, we think that John helped author the ransom note by dictating some of the ransom note, and Patsy would write it down. That's where we think the proper burial came from and the foreign faction came from. That's what we think. That's what we speculate. And so here, when Patsy is gone and you don't have anybody to second guess you or check you or say, no, let's not go that direction, then you can move forward with how you see fit in terms of talking about what needs to be done in the investigation. And so now we see more about John talking about the DNA. After he's been exonerated with the DNA, immediately, what it says in the reports, immediately after Mary Lacey cleared him, then he tried to flip it on a family member. And we'll see that a little bit later. So that's interesting. And that, I think that's a crucial point, because if you were well aware that the charges would expire and you look at the track record and say, what has been done in the next 3 years to really focus on where we can find or sort of shore up some of the things that the grand jury found. Because essentially what you're saying is that the grand jury didn't find anything, nothing that you can go off of. Well, we're finding broken statements and we're finding contradictions left and right. Did you even read the transcripts to know what was going on? Did your investigators even, did your detectives, investigators even read the transcripts or review the transcripts to go back and fact check and say, okay, this is what they said to the police, and this is what they said to us, and this is what they said in the depositions? Anything? No. This is what other people are saying to kind of get an idea about where to look and where to focus next. But the fact that DA Hunter sort of just very quietly allowed these charges, because you mislead people into saying that by not saying anything, you mislead people and you make them believe that there is no indictment. Well, people don't know the law, so they don't know, well, hey, let's nobody knew to be able to put, nobody knew enough to put pressure on him. And that's why there's this big thing around Alex Hunter, not saying anything or not being clear about whether there was an indictment or not. All he said was, we don't have enough evidence to move forward. And that made people think that there was no indictment. But then, because he knew they didn't know the law, because the law was so new and so fresh, then he didn't care to explain that we're not going to be releasing a report, because I'm just going to let you think that, grand jury reports never get released. And I'm just going to let you think that, because that's how it's always been. Instead of being transparent and saying, well, we can't get the report because there was an actual indictment, but we don't believe we have enough evidence to move forward with that indictment. And instead of facing the people who could question him about that and say, well, what do you mean? What about this? What about this? That would have made him stay closer to his job, and that would have made him stick with it until the end. That would have held him accountable. But instead of doing that, he very carefully chose his words so that he didn't have to stay on the case and he could move forward. That sounds a little suspect, and that sounds a little fishy to me. Because anybody who was really trying, it would seem like you would be clear and say, you know what? There is an indictment, and there's an indictment for this, or we have an indictment that we're not comfortable sharing it. But given that there's an indictment, what we want to do is, we don't believe that we have enough evidence. Now, over the next, coming days, we're going to look more at the evidence to see what we can find, to see if it's there, or to see if we can find anything, because you presented the case. You presented this. You led them to try to convict on child neglect and child abuse. You led them to this. And you almost made it seem like there was something there, only to turn around and be like, oh, we don't have anything. And then to let it rot quietly by the way you said it, and because you knew nobody knew the law, to just let it rot quietly and go away. That is shady. And then after 3 years, when if anybody would have been able to pick it up and say, well, wait, we don't have any time to we got to look at this because these charges are about to expire. You just let it go quietly into the night and didn't give anyone a heads up. And knowing, I'm pretty sure you knew, knowing very, very highly possible that he was well aware that once you let these charges expire, they can no longer be tried on these charges. What kind of investigation are you running? Because you like to blame other people and say, oh, these people thought they had it figured out and they had no experience. Well, what good did you do? Even with the experience that you had, you weren't taking anybody to trial. And you allowed charges to just float away. You didn't even try. You didn't even give good faith effort. We don't even know what you did. You didn't even go in and demand subpoena phone and credit card records that we are aware of in the grand jury room directly from the phone company. It took all day and night to get crucial pieces like their clothes. Let the body go when you know the BPD still needed the body. You know, somebody who may not know better might think that you're trying to help the Ramseys. But that can't be the case. You have too much integrity. I know you would do that. But it just seems like it. You know what I mean? Like it just seems, it just seems that way. So, second point I want to get to, we've touched on that, and we'll have a derivative story off of that one. Initially resistant to the idea of cooperating with the grand jury process overseen by Hunter, the Whites did eventually testify, impressed by the determination of the veteran prosecutor, Mike Cain, brought in to run the grand jury. According to Priscilla, Cain later told her that if he'd known how bad it was inside the Boulder DA's office, he would have turned down the job. After more than a year of hearings, the proceedings ended with no indictment being filed. In my notes, I have that Cain mentions that it was pretty bad inside of the prosecutor's office, so much so that he mentioned he may have never taken the job. And so, while Alex Hunter is trying to throw shade at the BPD and saying, "Oh, you guys don't know what you're talking about. You guys don't know what you're doing. You have no experience." Mike Cain is from out of town. He's from Pennsylvania. He comes from out of town and says, man, it's pretty messed up in here. I've already taken the job, but it's pretty messed up in here. It's pretty bad. So you didn't know what you were doing either. So how can we take anything that you say seriously as the DA of Boulder? How can we take anything seriously because somebody in your office is like, these people don't know what they're doing here. This DA, man, I don't know what he's doing. We'll see more about that a little bit later because it's definitely weird. I believe we're here at point 3. Yep. Okay. So the Whites were chagrined to learn that John Ramsey had said in his police interviews that he thought Priscilla was sort of a person who might own a stun gun and use the words fat cat and a term found in the ransom note. And it's funny because I was going through the videos and John definitely did up and say, oh yeah, in my mind, Priscilla may have done something like that. And I was like, what? Who says that? Who would say that? Fleet and Priscilla, in my notes, it says, Fleet and Priscilla were surprised. I'm sorry, it says the Whites were surprised that the Ramseys threw them under the bus after thinking that they were just simply exiled. Not only were they surprised that they were thrown under the bus after thinking that they were exiled, they were surprised that they were thrown under the bus because they had just tried to sit with John and Patsy and encourage John and Patsy and say, do the right thing. As a friend, I'm telling you, do the right thing. But instead of doing that, John said, okay, and then turned around and said, you know what? I'm not going to do that, and went another direction. So whatever Fleet told John to do, John said, you know what? We're not doing that, and turned around and went a different direction. And not only did John turn around and go a different direction, but he kind of threw Fleet and Priscilla under the bus and said, you know who may have done this? Fleet and Priscilla, which would indicate that Fleet and Priscilla are nasty like that. They're gross like that. They have deranged minds. They're deranged monsters. And they were jealous of John Ramsey, is what that's supposed to indicate. Now, the problem here and the disrespect comes in because you're accusing these individuals of something that you have never ever mentioned. Hey, Fleet kind of has always been weird like this, or Priscilla has always kind of been weird like this. So when this came to a head, I thought that was kind of funny. Number one. Number two, you've had these people around your kids. You just got done going to a Christmas party with them. How then are we supposed to believe you and believe that you truly feel that these people could have done this to your daughter? How are we supposed to believe that? You just allowed your daughter around their kids to go play Nintendo and play with Barbie dolls or whatever they were doing when they were upstairs. And now all of a sudden, we're supposed to believe that these people are the ones who could kill your daughter when you trusted them fully with your whole life. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying that it's mighty weird that all of a sudden you're all in. Because all of the Ramsey friends were hesitant to blame the Ramseys for this. All of John and Patsy's friends were hesitant to blame them for this. But yet John and Patsy had no such prohibition within their mind. No such inhibition about, hey, am I doing the right thing? Should I say this? They just let it rip. They just let it rip. On their closest friends, they just let it rip. Especially after you guys have talked and had a conversation and it was calm. You guys turned around. That's very snake-like. Very snake-like. And Jim Moreno was, man, it kind of hurt me to know that John would say this about me. I imagine Fleet would have probably said the same thing. It kind of hurt me to know that John would say this about me, because I know that's not how I am. And I don't know John to throw people under the bus like that, but it's kind of weird that he did that. Our next point, when we look at the notes, says, but the strangest attack came from the shadows, from someone the whites had never met. It was an allegation so absurd, so unsubstantiated that it should have blown away in the wind. But in the mire of the Ramsey case, it flourished, with long-standing repercussions. One day in February 2000, the whites found a message on their answering machine from a Daily Camera reporter seeking last-minute comment about a story the paper was planning to run on a P-file ring and the Ramsey case. The next morning, splashed across the front page was a copyrighted story by Barry Hartman, the paper's opinion page editor, announcing new information that could provide a major breakthrough in the JonBenet case. The information came from a 37-year-old mystery woman from California who claimed to have suffered abuse, both physical and intimate, dating back to when she was 3. Much of the abuse had come during a holiday party, she said, and involved a little bit of roughhousing around the neck, I'll say it like that, and blows to the head. Similar techniques, in her view, to those used on JonBenet. Although the perpetrators of these ritual abuse parties weren't explicitly identified, the article went on to explain that the woman said she knows the Ramseys through the Fleet White family. She said the godfather to her mother is Fleet White Sr., 86, of California. Hartman's report noted that Boulder police had interviewed the woman for several hours and were skeptical of her claims, but her attorney, Lee Hill, described her as among the most credible witnesses I have ever interviewed. And the punchline came from the district attorney, Alex Hunter, who was quoted as saying that the woman's story was very believable and warrants investigation. The story quickly went viral. It would be almost 3 months before the Boulder police and prosecutors issued a statement debunking the woman's child abuse ring claims about the JonBenet murder. By that time, sordid speculations about the multi-generational pedophile in the White family or pedophilia in the White family were circulating across Boulder and cyberspace. It would take years of open records battles, and court action before the Whites were able to learn more about how the woman had managed to insert herself into the Ramsey investigation, win the ringing endorsements of the top prosecutor in the case, and be the subject of a front page story that was as remarkable for its omissions as for its wide-eyed gullibility. The woman's name was Nancy Krebs. She had a documented history of abuse by a family member who had been convicted of assault in 1980, and her grandparents had been good friends of Fleet White Sr. That much was true. She said she had contacted Boulder attorney Lee Hill, who represented a local man in a civil case related to the Ramsey investigation, because she'd seen him on television, and her therapist was urging her to come forward with what she knew. Hill, in turn, had introduced her to Hartman. Hartman was hardly a disinterested party in the case. The camera's coverage had been highly sympathetic to the Ramseys and critical of the police. Hartman apparently paid for Hill's plane ticket to California so he could meet with Krebs. The ultimate objective, Hartman later admitted, was to bring the mystery woman and her story directly to Alex Hunter, since he didn't trust the Boulder police to adequately investigate her claims. Hartman arranged a meeting between Hill and Hunter at Hartman's house. Also present was a DA's investigator who took meticulous notes, and Hill's friend, author Stephen Singular. That's where that book comes from, Stephen Singular, whose book on the Ramsey case had theorized that JonBenet's death was tied to a pedophile subculture in Boulder. Singular asked Hunter if there was interest in investigating the White family. Alex Hunter responded that he was interested in any nexus to Fleet White, the investigator noted. Hill talked at length about the need to protect his client from a vengeful ring of abusers, including members of her own family, and expressed his belief that the supposed rift between the Whites and the Ramseys was just subterfuge. When the police sat down with Krebs and Hill a few days later, they soon discovered several huge problems with her story. She was the subject of a missing person report from California. She claimed to be a witness in at least two other homicide investigations. She claimed that she'd been assaulted at different times in her youth by Fleet White Jr., Fleet White Sr., and Uncle John Ramsey, and that her mother and niece were present at the Whites' 1996 Christmas dinner hours before JonBenet was killed. But the detectives found no evidence that Krebs had ever even met Fleet Jr. or Ramsey. Her mother and niece weren't at the Whites for Christmas dinner. Almost nothing about her account of that evening fit the circumstances of the JonBenet homicide. Hartman, who interviewed Krebs extensively himself before running his front page exclusive, didn't respond to a request for comment. But it's doubtful he would have published such a tale if Hunter hadn't remarked how believable the witness was. Hunter had set in on the first round of the police interviews. Hartman would later tell investigators that Hunter had been opposed to going public with the story. So, what prompted him to endorse the mystery woman in print? Hunter didn't respond to a request for an interview for this article, but he backpedaled on his comments almost as soon as they were published. Opinions about believability are premature before a full investigation is complete, he acknowledged in a hastily issued press release. Now, you know Alex Hunter is messy. You know he's messy. You know he got Commander Eller. He was trying to get Commander Eller thrown out on some bullcrap. knowing Commander Eller wasn't even tied to it. He had put out and this is what um, Charles Brennan said in his report to the ISOB, International Society of Barristers. What he was saying in his report about JonBenet, I think he was saying it there. He was saying that Alex Hunter had tasked him and um, another uh, journalist, I think at the Globe, think Shapiro at the Globe. He had tasked them both with going up and sort of digging up this dirt on Commander Eller and saying, hey, Commander Eller went to Florida and he tried to get hired over here as a chief of police, and he didn't. And what you may find is that he went down there and rubbed people the wrong way. And not only did he rub people the wrong way, what you may have found is that he actually assaulted somebody down there, and they're just not talking about it. That's why he didn't get the job. And so when Charles Brennan and Shapiro went and looked, they didn't find anything. So I don't think they ever ran anything with it that I know of. But they were saying, Alex Hunter put them up to it and was more than happy to be like, hey, go take a look. And Alex Hunter's point in all of this was, well, I didn't think he was supposed to be on the case. He was messing the case up. He didn't know what he was talking about and all this nonsense. So it obviously makes sense that somebody came to you with another juicy story and you said, absolutely, let's go for it. And if you were one for the intruder theory or any theory that puts blame on anyone other than John and Patsy Ramsey, then this story would be viable because you could say, oh, Fleet White is part of this ring, or Fleet White, whether it's part of a ring or not, you can say, oh, Fleet White did this, so Fleet White's going to become our main suspect. That's what you can say. And by doing that, you would have not only tainted the investigation, but you would have steered the investigation in a way that didn't really have any proof behind it. Without you don't even have a full investigation in full effect. You don't even have an investigation in full effect or in motion before you start telling people, well, let's take a look at this story. Let's run with this story. Let's put the story out. At least investigate it on the back end and then put the story out. I know what the news media is going to do. Absolutely, they're going to do whatever they do with the opinion piece, and I agree. As an opinion piece, that's fine, because it's just an opinion. It's not saying it's fact. It's just an opinion, but it's a very strong opinion. It's going to get people's attention, because for those people who are involved with this line of thinking, that's going to appeal to them, as it should. And so once you publish this, then Fleet's going to come under the microscope, maybe for something that has nothing to do with him. And Alex Hunter, you let it happen. And instead of giving a report or response and saying, well, we don't immediately, and saying, well, we don't know about this. Let me finish this off so we know. A secretary's notes of phone messages coming into Hunter's office after the article appeared indicate that his enthusiasm of pursuing the Krebs allegations took some of his colleagues by surprise. A message from prosecutor Michael Caine. Caine thought you had come to the conclusion that this woman is a goofball. So Caine is curious as to how this hit the paper in the way that it did. Michael Caine said earlier, I don't even know what's going on here. This place is bad. I don't even know what's going on here. And you lend credibility to something like this without even doing a full investigation. You lend your credibility to something like this. And Michael Caine is like, who am I working with? Why would you say that? What, let me ask you this, Alex, what part of the investigation are you in again? What part of the investigation are you a part of again? Because I'm confused. Where do you come in? Because you don't seem to insert yourself in any part of the investigation that's useful. And we have to ask, do we even need you in this investigation? Because it seems like you're just mucking things up. Everything is just messed up. When you come and start touching stuff, it's like, when you have everything just perfectly fine on your desk. It's like, hey, I got everything set like I want it. Don't touch anything. And then Alex comes in and he starts, ooh, what's this? Stop touching my desk, please. Please stop touching my desk. Don't touch anything in here, please. That's what it seems like Alex was doing because he seems so disconnected. In no interviews or any important part of the case do I find Alex Hunter. So why is Alex Hunter's name even being mentioned? Why is he even here? Why is he even presenting the case to the grand jury? Why are you here? Can't we get somebody else to present this case to the grand jury? Because you're no help. The police are doing real work, and Michael Caine and your other investigators are trying to do real work and ask real questions, and you're over here chasing stories that are not even related to the case, that are not even on par with what they've been talking about. Now, I'm not trying to call Nancy a liar or what have you. I don't know the woman. I don't know enough about the woman. That's not my angle. I know plenty of people who have touched on it and hit on it. That's somebody else's angle. What I am saying is, if this is not at all central to the case, why are you bringing this in the case and saying, okay, we need to go this direction? Can't you just at least be like, look it up and get a full investigation on it and get a full handle on it and then bring it to the police and be, hey, not to interrupt what you guys have going on, or even your own team, not to interrupt what you guys have going on, but I've done some extensive investigation. I've been working on this with this reporter, just been getting all the news and saying, hey, let's look at this. And I think there's another angle here. We need to follow up on this young lady. And you just hot potato this stuff in people's lap, this half baked theory, you just hot potato it in their lap. And it's like, go do the legwork for this. And what are you actually doing again here? What's your job? Why don't you go politic? Why don't you go outside and say hello to people? Why don't you go shake some hands or do whatever it is that DAs do? Why don't you go do that and stay out of the way of people who are doing real work, please? So Michael Caine was surprised. Message from Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner. Mark thought you and he had come to an agreement on Sunday that yes, while there were some credibility issues, Mark agreed that they needed to follow it up. Obviously, you believe she is more believable than they do at this point. So Chief Beckner had a problem with it, and Michael Caine had a problem with it. People from inside your office and outside your office. Obviously, you believe she is more believable than they do at this point. Other media outlets quickly picked up the story. The local CBS affiliate News 4 even used its report on the mystery woman to tease the upcoming Schiller miniseries. Fleet and Priscilla suspected that more than coincidence was involved in the trashing of their reputation. Just as the miniseries was hitting the airwaves, based on a book the Whites had denounced as riddled with inaccuracies, the Ramseys were preparing to launch their own book. The umbrella of suspicion needs to reach beyond the heads of John and Patsy Ramsey, huffed an editorial in the camera, and the whiter net had ensnared and befouled the entire White family. We really don't know where Nancy Krebs came from, Fleet says now. I can't prove this, but I believe that one reason people came after us is to demonstrate to the world that there were other suspicious people out there. We were already in the crosshairs. We were the flavor of the month. After 11 weeks and extensive interviews with members of her family, the Boulder police concluded the Krebs investigation, having found no credible evidence linking anything the woman said to JonBenet's murder. Krebs, who had said she never wanted her story published, but has also never recanted, could not be reached for comment. The Whites embarked on a long, frustrating campaign to seek criminal libel charges against the camera and those individuals responsible for disseminating the woman's allegations. In 2003, a special prosecutor declined to pursue the matter, noting the shaky legal standing of the state's seldom used criminal libel statute and other considerations. So, in my notes, I have Fleet and Priscilla were surprised at the Nancy Krebs story and thought it should have blown away, but Hunter gave life to it. They indicate that Krebs inserted herself because she saw Fleet on TV. But she did have a history of abuse via a family member who knew Fleet White's dad. Her story seemed to fall apart when she said her mother was at the White's Christmas party, which the article claims is not true. and she said she knew John Ramsey through Fleet and that she was assaulted by both John Ramsey and Fleet. Now, I think your story might start falling apart when you start talking about John Ramsey because, to my knowledge, John Ramsey, you call him Uncle John Ramsey. It's like I don't think that's going to be a tough sell. That's going to be a stretch. I don't think you can connect yourself to John. Now you have a case, I think, a little bit. If you connect yourself to Fleet, if you were left it alone at Fleet, you probably would have had more credibility. But once you start going after John and you start saying stuff like, "Oh, my mother was there at the Christmas party with John," that's a little bit hard to prove, especially if they're smart and they go look at any plane tickets or any modes of travel for your mother to even check that, and they go even before that, they go check with witnesses at the party to say, was this woman here? And nobody confirms her alibi that she was there. And then you go look at the credit card records and the plane records and stuff like that, the travel information, and you find, well, she didn't even travel out of California at this time to even be here in Colorado at this time. So very easily you discredit that part, and then it's just about Fleet having done something crazy to you when you were younger. That's probably the furthest it's going to go. So when you mentioned John, I think her story fell by the wayside, or it fell off. The wheels fell off when she started to try to mention John. I would have left that part out because it would have seemed like there was a lot of similarities with Fleet and the JonBenet case until she mentioned John. Um, I did not find any discussion of Nancy by either Patsy Ramsey or John Ramsey in any of the sources I looked in, which would mean she was not seriously on the radar from 1997 to 2001 or even 2012, as John does not mention her in his book. And we know if this were something that legitimately came up, John would not let any allegation like this go undiscussed in any form. We know that. I think in his book, in his book, in the other side of suffering, John was so John don't miss a beat. John doesn't miss nothing. Y'all can let John fool you if you want to, but John don't miss nothing. I think Anne Louise Bardock in her article Missing Innocence by Vanity Fair, she said she quoted Officer French as saying that Patsy was looking through splayed fingers. Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Patsy was looking through splayed fingers, and John, somebody caught on to that story. I think in an interview. I think, and I can't remember the interview. I can't remember where it was. I think it was in an A&E documentary or something like that. Somebody questioned them about that or whatever, and then John came back and in his book he remembered that line. He remembered that line. That line hit, and so he remembered it. Somebody said that we were looking through splayed fingers. What? No, that could we were genuinely sad and hurt, you know. So John didn't let that go. So what my point is, if Nancy would have been in serious consideration for John, at least John would have mentioned it. I don't see any in any of the interviews. I don't see in any of the books that John mentions this, and that lets me know that this is not something. To me, that means to me that this is not something that was even a threat to John. That John felt was even a threat. That he would need to mention that, because John would have brought it up in this way. He would have said, "Oh, everything was, crazy at that point. It was so wild, and even at one point there was this one story about this one lady who had met us from California, and he may not have said her name, but he definitely would have mentioned the situation." And I couldn't find it from the interviews, from the depositions, from anything in the books. I didn't find anything. So that kind of lets me know that this story might be on shaky ground because John would have mentioned it just from that social component. And then lastly, Hunter seemed to backpedal when they used his name for credibility, and Kane questioned Hunter's ethics at this point. And the whites actually tried to press charges on this, even though they were later dropped. Switching on to the next point. James Kohler who was for 2 years the chief investigator of the Ramsey homicide under Lacey, had trouble getting with the program. As he saw it, many of the odd bits of evidence upon which Smith's intruder theory was originally built, an unidentified palm print on the wine cellar door, a hair on a blanket, a footprint in the dust, had been subsequently identified or explained away. Kohler's own review of the video taken of the crime scene convinced him that an intruder hadn't gained entrance through a basement window as Smith had proposed. So I have here in my notes just a very simple note. Kohler was apparently tasked with finding more about the DNA on JonBenet's body, and this is difficult as I'm not sure they collected the DNA on her legs, and I think it came back to say that it could have been blood or something like that. It could have been blood on her legs, sort of as opposed to I think what Linda Arndt said when she said it was consistent with male fluid. So it's either the blood or the male fluid, but we don't know because it was wiped away, it was wiped off, and we didn't get much information on that. So we continue to go down here. Kohler's efforts to refocus the investigation on the people known to be in the house that night weren't welcomed by his boss. The official probe was no longer about the Ramseys, but about tracking down random, sometimes wacky tips and leads. Although the body had apparently been wiped down, investigators had found minute amounts of unidentified DNA, including male DNA mixed with JonBenet's blood in her underwear. Find the owner of that DNA, the mantra went, and you have your perpetrator. Lacey was determined to pursue the intruder scenario wherever it might lead. And so my notes go further in saying that Mary Lacey did the same thing as D.A. Hunter previously. I think that might be down here. Okay, yeah. That might be down here. So, kind of sort of clearing up the point in that Kohler was essentially tasked. Now, I know he has a book. I think it is Foreign Faction. And now, to be clear, I've not read any of these books. I have not read Perfect Murder, Perfect Town. I have not read Foreign Faction. I have not read Steve Thomas's book. I have not. I've only skimmed through John and Patsy's book, The Death of Innocence. I have skimmed through, very lightly skimmed through for just important pieces, and I refer to it often. The Other Side of Suffering and The Death of Innocence. I do not want to be influenced by those books. I'm not saying that they're bad books. From what I know, the people who read those books, give them glaring reviews and love the books. That's great. I just don't want to be influenced by that. That's all I'm saying. But from what I know, they're pretty good books, pretty solid books. So from what I hear, so Kohler is, and then he gives a lot of information according to some stuff, but I don't have it. I can't use even some of the information that he mentions. I don't have that information, so I can't use it. So it's just I don't want to talk about something I don't have access to, um, in terms of my investigation. If at some point in time I get access to it later and I can talk about it with confidence, then sure. But until I get access to it, I can't talk about it, and put it in my investigation. So, anyways, Kohler is kind of being tasked with finding other people who may match this DNA, and she's kind of cleared. She's cleared the Ramseys, or she's trying to clear the Ramseys, and say, don't look at these people. Don't circle the wagon and look inside the house anymore. Don't look at the people that were there in the house anymore. Um, Look at other things, and because I'm about to do something crazy, which brings us to which brings us to this part. In 2008, a few months before leaving office, bruh, a few months before leaving office, Lacey took another bold step that left many longtime observers of the case spluttering in disbelief. She sent a letter to John Ramsey, and Patsy had died of ovarian cancer shortly before Carr's arrest, formally exonerating his family in any suspicion in JonBenet's death. To the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime, I am deeply sorry, she wrote. No innocent person should have to endure such an extensive trial. In the court of public opinion, the exoneration, Lacey explained, was based on new developments in so called Touch DNA, the detection and analysis of microscopic traces of cellular material often found in places where no obvious stains could be discerned. Scrapings of the long johns worn by JonBenet had turned up two sites of male DNA that matched the profile found in the underwear. 2 years earlier, Lacey had conceded that the weak underwear sample could be an artifact and not the killer's at all, but now she referred to it as powerful evidence of an unknown perpetrator. Despite substantial efforts over the years to identify the source of the DNA, there is no innocent explanation for its incriminating presence at three sites on these two different items of clothing that JonBenet was wearing at the time of the murder. Since it was issued, Lacey's exoneration has been routinely cited in most news stories about the Ramsey case, usually in a way that implies the Ramseys have been positively and unambiguously cleared by DNA. But Kohler considers the letter to be misleading at best. It fails to mention that investigators also found unidentified DNA from two males and one female under the victim's fingernails. Samples too tiny and badly degraded to put into a database or even determine if they came from blood or skin tissues. They also gathered additional samples of DNA from two males that came from the cord and garrote used in the crime. None of these samples match each other or the touch DNA obtained from the clothing. So you got all this DNA, these samples that don't match. Like they don't. It's not consistent. That's what we were telling you before you go out and exonerate people. There's hey Mary, hello. There's a problem with the DNA. I think you need to look more. There was a glaring problem with the DNA well before you exonerate. But even without all of this, even without going in depth on this, just looking at the DNA report, there is a glaring problem with your exoneration. And that glaring problem is that we cannot exclude Burke on the Barbie nightgown. Hello. The Barbie nightgown has blood on it. Hello. It has blood on it. Why is Burke's why is his DNA on an item that has blood on it, especially on an item that she was not wearing? Hello. That could be a problem, but you're exonerating them. That does not make sense. Just looking at that alone takes the exoneration away. But Mary Lacey's out here. Just DNA can be very helpful in any criminal investigation, but it needs to be looked at in the context of all the other evidence. Kohler says, if you look at all the trace samples involved in this, if you follow the DNA evidence solely, then we should be looking for 6 perpetrators, not 1. Thank you. That's what I'm saying. Think. John is out here talking about, oh, the DNA. Think. Please. For the love of God. This does not make sense. We're looking for 6 different people. The forensic report will tell you in so many terms. If you just go read it, it will tell you this was degraded. This was degraded. We pulled this, but we couldn't use this. There was an unidentified male and an unidentified female here. He was included in this. There's no inclusion on this, so on and so forth. It will tell you that. Without even using Kohler, it will tell you that. That's what's weird. Lacey's assertion that there is no innocent explanation for one partial DNA profile showing up in 3 locations is also dubious. Dan Crane, a biochemist who's testified as a DNA expert in criminal cases around the world, says the ability to gather even smaller amounts of DNA has raised increasing concerns about the provenance of that evidence. The DNA in your test could be there because of a contact that was weeks, months, even years before the crime occurred, he says. It's not possible to make inferences about the tissue source here. We can't say that it came from semen or saliva or blood or anything. What if one of the medical examiners sneezed on one of these articles of clothing and it came into contact with the other one? There are just too many possibilities. And so in my notes, I have that Mary Lacey did the same thing as D.A. Hunter. She exonerated the Ramseys before leaving office. She did this using DNA, but Kohler pushes back, saying DNA from two unidentified males and one female were under JonBenet Ramsey's fingernails. Other experts say it's not even possible to tell if it comes from saliva, male body fluids, or blood, or anything. So it is concluded that Lacey's actions were very misguided. Nine News. Nine News tried before she put the exoneration out. Nine News tried to reach out to her and say, "Hey, this is not no, you can't do this." Kohler in your office working under you saying, "Boss lady, I don't think this is it." Like a biochemist is coming and said, "Boss lady, I don't think this is it, DA. I think you might need to just take a step back and take a look." To no avail. She ain't gonna have it. And that's what's crazy. These people are saying that even though Mary Lacey is saying there's no innocent explanation for this to be there, we don't even know who the DNA belongs to. It doesn't match anybody in the system, Mary. We don't even know if this is legitimate, Mary. You did this. You exonerated the Ramseys and then hot potatoed and jumped your behind out of office. Just like Alex Hunter. My last stand. That's consistent. My last stand as a prosecutor. Alex Hunter is out here. My last stand as a prosecutor is exonerating the Ramseys. According to the 1999 grand jury results, we don't have any reason or any way to move forward. There's plenty of stuff that you can do and then Mary Lacey comes right behind her predecessor. To the extent that we may have caused you any harm, we want to exonerate you on some shaky foundation stuff. Just shaky. I can understand if it at the time it wasn't shaky, but at the time it was shaky. At the time people were saying, "Hey, this is shaky." DA Hunter and Mary Lacey did the same exact thing. And that's let the Ramseys off the hook, knowing that they had holes in their story and holes in their reasoning for letting the Ramseys off the hook. They let them off the hook. With people pointing out there are holes here. You should not be letting them off the hook. We have plenty of reasons why you shouldn't. And they just bulldozed right through it. Just bulldozed right on through it. My next point, I could stay on that all day, but I'm not going to do it. My next point, um, out from under the umbrella at last, John Ramsey wasted little time spreading the news. He gave an interview to author and journalist Lucinda Franks that was published on the Daily Beast website in October of 2008, 3 months after Lacey's apology. The article discussed how Ramsey had sold his big houses, was burning through his retirement savings, and had lingering suspicions that someone in the family's inner circle killed his daughter. He and a few allies from Boulder suspect one particular friend who was familiar with the Ramseys' home and details of their life. However, District Attorney Mary Lacey says that this individual has been thoroughly vetted and cleared through the new DNA. So he wasted little time and saying, someone from my family's inner circle has done this. And so I say, after being cleared, apparently, John stated somebody from his inner circle may have committed the crime, but D.A. Lacey kind of shot that down and said, "No, that's not true." John wasted. This is what I was saying. This is in '08, right? This goes to the question that I was asking earlier. Until the Ramseys were cleared by DNA, I am wondering if John had anything to say about the DNA. If you were so confident that you would have been cleared by the DNA, then why did you not say anything about the DNA before? Why don't I see it? Ain't no mention of the DNA before until you completely become confident. And all of a sudden, the buzzword is DNA. Oh, the DNA, the DNA, the DNA. So apparently, the touch DNA is this. And for what we know about the DNA, it's this. John, you don't know nothing about no DNA. What are you talking about? To my next point, and I'm wrapping this up, man. I feel pretty good. Getting through my notes pretty well. I think. Oh, I think. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay. I think I highlighted it, but that's okay. My notes say that when the grand jury docs were requested, um, only the indictments were released. Stan Garnett was on board apparently, but the judge only released the indictments. And so I see Stan's name down here somewhere. Yeah, I think it's around here where like we said, Mary Lacey just basically hot potatoed that stuff into into somebody else's lap, and people just like, what the heck, man? So in early 2013, the Daily Camera had another front page exclusive about the Ramsey case, citing anonymous sources. Charlie Brennan, a veteran of the Ramsey beat, reported that the grand jury had voted in 1999 to indict John and Patsy Ramsey for felony child abuse resulting in death. Brennan then went to court to seek a release of the actual true bills signed by the jury foreman. Stan Garnett, the current Boulder District Attorney, submitted 18 pages for judicial review. Last fall, Judge Robert Lowenbach decided to release only 4 redacted pages, showing that the grand jury had indeed sought the indictments of the parents on identical counts of felony child abuse and an accessory charge. Um, in some quarters, the revelation was quickly downplayed as no big deal. Ramsey attorney Lynn Wood called the true bills a historical footnote, nothing more. Hunter hadn't signed the indictments or submitted them to the court, and there's a vast difference between probable cause, standard grand jurors are supposed to consider in voting to indict, and the DA's burden at trial to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. More legal language, more legalese, more lawyering is what we're having. Besides, Wood's clients had been exonerated by Hunter's successor years before. And so when we pull out the fact that your client was indicted on child abuse and neglect, when we pull that out, you say it's a historical footnote. What does that mean? For it to be a historical footnote, why are you acting like JonBenet's death means nothing? When you say that, you're saying JonBenet is a historical footnote, nothing more. There's a vast difference between this and that. Nothing more. And you start using all this legal language on JonBenet. What kind of a person are you? That doesn't have anything to do with anything. Plus they've been exonerated already. I don't care what they've been, because we're talking about that's an exoneration in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. That's what they're talking about in the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. We're talking about having something to do in terms of being an accessory and child abuse related charges. That's what they're talking about. That's two different things. Abuse and neglect and murder. It's two different things. Two different lines of reasoning and logic. And that's why I say Alex Hunter did not have to pursue murder against the Ramseys. He had to pursue something which I think had a much lower burden or much lower barriers, and that was child neglect and abuse. You had much lower barriers. Not to say that you had a lower level of reasonable doubt that you had to go to a hurdle to get over. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying you still have to put in the work, but I'm saying proving murder is not your point. Proving murder is that you've put JonBenet in the hands of somebody. We can just tell you JonBenet was sick 27 times. And she kept going to the doctor, and she got vaginitis many times. Her health is in question. And you're telling me you have nothing? Dark circles under the eyes of a 6-year-old, and you're telling me she has nothing? Y'all can't dig a little deeper to understand what this stuff means? But the whites who had followed the court battle with great interest thought it was highly significant that the grand jury's decision had been quite different from what the public had been led to believe for so many years. The panel had heard testimony from all sides. Whites and Ramseys and intruder theorists included and reviewed all of the relevant evidence available in 1999 and had come back with the crazy idea that the parents should be prosecuted. Like we've said in this investigation, all of that. You guys did all of that, all of this, and they still come back and said, indict them on child. All of the stuff, intruder theory and all of this stuff, they came back and said, indict them. So there must have been something strong to say, indict them. The existence of the true bills didn't prove anybody's guilt, but it did raise many questions. Why had Hunter kept their existence secret? Who else, in addition to Hunter, Lacey, and Garnett, had known about the documents? Had their suppression been part of a plan to exonerate the Ramseys? What was in the remaining pages of the pages that the judge refused to release? If you try to go get those documents now, you ain't gonna get them. If you try to go get them right now, you ain't gonna get them. I might try, because I just want to see them. I might try, but it's going to be hard. D.A. Garnett says that the whites are asking fair questions, even if he's not in a position to answer them all. He says he learned about the Ramsey true bills in a meeting with Mary Lacey the day before he was sworn into office in 2009. He says, when I took over, we had a bunch of meetings in the office basically saying, what the heck are we going to do about these? He recalls, I've tried to run an office as open as I can possibly be to the public and the press. The one exception to that is grand jury stuff. There might have been a public interest in releasing the indictments, but the rules on grand jury secrecy are so strict and so clear that I felt it would be inappropriate for me to release them on my own. Garnett says he has tried to distance himself from the Ramsey nightmare. Over the past 6 years, one of his first moves was to turn the investigation back over to police. He insists that he isn't bound by Lacey's exoneration letter, which he describes as weird and a stretch, and that he would be prepared to prosecute the case if he's ever presented with sufficient evidence to convict, and he's troubled by the long-term credibility issues his office has faced as a result of its treatment of what is now a cold case. Now, we pulled from the Daily Camera's website where we saw he and Chief Beckner had gotten together and did a press conference on basically what he's saying here. We saw that. So at least this part of the article is true, because that's if you go on the Daily Camera's YouTube webpage, you're going to see an interview probably about 6 minutes long, I think it is. And it's going to be Chief Beckner and Garnett sitting side by side, and they're just kind of talking about trying to reestablish a relationship between the DA's office and the police department and try to solve this case together and trying to establish trust in each other. He says, I actually think of the many things that were mishandled by my predecessors. There's an argument that the true bill should have been filed with the court, and then the district attorney could say he wouldn't prosecute them, he says. One of the problems that Alex had was that he didn't use the grand jury very much and didn't have a lot of confidence in it. Look, while Alex at the top of the podcast, while Alex is out here calling the Boulder Police Department inexperienced, sir, you don't use the grand jury much. You're inexperienced. That's why we're having the problems that we're having, because you're inexperienced. You don't know what you're doing with the grand jury. And so you go in there, you don't do the things that are needed to be done, that need to be done. You don't ask the questions that need to be asked, even though the police told you what to ask. They told you what to ask, and you still didn't ask it. They told you what they needed, and you still, I am blown away that you still didn't call the Ramseys in to ask them questions. Those are the people that they wanted to talk to, for Christ's sakes. And you still didn't do it. How hard is that? You had very clear instructions. Very clear. Go get all of the credit card and the phone records. Talk to Burke, talk to John, talk to Patsy, make them talk in a way that we cannot make them talk now. Please subpoena them. For the love of God, subpoena them. And you didn't do it. And then you get behind the podium and you say, we have nothing else to do on this investigation. I guess, we just can't do anything. Linwood said it was a historical footnote and his clients had already been cleared. This sounds like a game of tag no tag backs. Forgot to read my notes. I got too excited. Of tag no tag backs. We already cleared. You can't talk about JonBenet. Talking about JonBenet being dead here. Talking about a little girl who hasn't received justice, and he does it, and he's playing a game of tag no tag backs. Very much giving. I got away with it. That actually should be, and I have in my notes. That actually should be an episode on how to get on the show, how to get away with murder, for sure. Lynn notes the difference between the return of an indictment and it actually being filed with the court. This info they knew, but failed to disclose until now. So you know the difference between actually coming back with an indictment and filing with the court. Like I said, we're going to talk about that probably next episode or two, something like that. DA Garnett suggests that Mary Lacey hot potato the true bills on him when he was being sworn in. When he was being sworn in. And they kind of already knew they had the indictments, but word around the office was that they didn't know what to do with the indictments. Police bungling is kind of at question here. So was it really police bungling? The next thing is Garnett says he didn't want to release anything grand jury related on his own because he was kind of scared about the strict policies, trying to distance himself from the Ramsey case. And then Garnett says that he isn't bound to Lacey's exonerations, calls it weird and a stretch. He admits that Lacey and Hunter mishandled things and that it can be argued that the true bills should have been filed with the court. He states that DA Hunter didn't normally use the grand jury because he didn't trust it, which shows clear amount of bias. And then we have, I think we're coming to the close of this. Tom Kelly, the media attorney who represented Brennan and the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press in the court battle, calls Hunter's burying of the true bills terrible precedent. It was an incredible decision to pocket that indictment and lead the public to believe there had been no indictment, he says. Kelly disagrees with the judge's decision not to release the rest of the pages, which might contain other charges the grand jury considered but didn't pursue, or the specific set of factual allegations underlying the child abuse and accessory accounts, but the plaintiffs chose not to appeal the ruling. We thought the chances of getting any further on appeal were slim enough not to make it worth the trouble, he says. And so basically, we want to know, obviously we know that there's a reason that they said, hey, here's child abuse, there's allegations for child abuse and accessory counts and stuff like that. So, but we want to know what's underlying those child abuse and accessory counts. What's the evidence? What's the proof? Because if we find that out, then that's going to give us an ability to follow up on some stuff and be like, oh, because we got some stuff too. You said that there was child abuse and underlying child abuse and there was accessory counts. Let's hear it. Because listen, accessory counts, that means you covered it up. There is strong enough evidence to say that you covered it up. What was it? That's where we need to go. We need to look at child abuse and we need to look at accessory. Where did you cover it up and why? Pull back the cover. Brandon said he didn't pursue anything other than the indictments because they were advised that the judge would not release them or the chances of winning were sort of slim, but it could show other charges pursued and how the grand jury came to its conclusions on the child abuse and neglect charges and the accessory charges. Garnett, I think in the end, Garnett, it goes down on to say that convinced that Colorado law requires the documents to be released in full, The Whites went to court themselves. Judge Andrew Hartman granted Garnett's motion to dismiss the case and suggested an injunction might be in order to control frivolous filings by pro se litigants. Fleet and Priscilla White haven't given up. They have peppered Garnett's office with open records requests, trying to obtain communications between prosecutors, the Ramsey attorneys, and others, only to be told that no correspondence from the Lacey years remains and that the emails are deleted after 6 months. This year, they demanded and received yet another statement from the Boulder police that they are witnesses, not suspects, after the Denver Post presented a photo roundup of former suspects in the Ramsey case that included John and Patsy Ramsey, John Mark Carr, and Fleet White. While not acknowledging its goof, the Post quickly changed the headline in its online edition to "Investigation Touched Many." Garnett declined to issue a similar statement. I have a lot of sympathy for the Whites, Garnett said. I think they're a little obsessed with the issue. If you want chatter to die off about you on the internet, then quit saying things. Quit generating new stories. But the Whites aren't about to quit saying things. Last spring, they appeared before the Boulder City Council with their children, Daphne and Fleet III, both graduates of the U.S. Naval Academy, seeking release of police investigative files on the Krebs matter that have been moldering since 2000. Their efforts were rebuffed, and the files remain sealed. Garnett says he still gets an average of 1 tip a week about the Ramsey case. Half the time, it's people who were just baptized by the Holy Spirit in Arkansas. Why you got to say Arkansas? God told them who killed JonBenet. He says, I tell them until God tells me, we're not going to have any discussion. There's a sordid interest out there in the Ramsey case that you just have to tune out and ignore. The Whites can't ignore it, not entirely. One day, they were a happy family with good friends whose little girl played with their daughter, and then the girl was dead, and the friends were no longer their friends, and evil came in and did its thing. All we want, Fleet says, is for the truth to come out. And then you have here Alan Prendergast's credentials. Staff writer at Westword and is now a senior contributor. He writes about various topics, but primarily focuses on news. He's contributed to the Rolling Stone, LA Times, Outside, USA Today, Men's Journal, and other publications, and is the author of 2 nonfiction books, Gangbuster, One Man's Battle Against Crime, and The Poison Tree, a true story of family violence and revenge. He's earned numerous accolades for his work, including the Gene Pulliam National Journalism Writing Award and 2 National Feature Writing Awards from the Society of Professional Journalists. His email is right there, alan.prendergast@westword.com. So that's all my notes on that. Thank you for watching. As I always say, like, share, subscribe, which apparently you guys have been liking and sharing and subscribing. So can't say anything to you about that. I appreciate it. Appreciate the gifters, Eva West, Trace, the Ace, and Louise. Sorry, I don't know why I say that so fast. Louise. I appreciate you all for donating and helping the channel and whatnot, and being here to kind of give your thoughts and opinions. I appreciate that. I'll be back with a derivative story, and thank you so much for your contributions. And like I always say, take care of yourself. Don't work too hard. Until next time, take it easy.